Right. I
We'll
think the
start.
recording was the recording on. Ah, fine. Okay. Excellent. So we have got to session 6, and I'm going to give you a choice for what we do for session 7 at the end. So remind me if I don't ask you.
Okay.
But this time we're going to look at core practices and beliefs. We've done quite a bit of history. We've done a bit of Qur'an. We've done a bit of Islamic law and compared a little bit to Jewish law. So now this is slightly backwards, but we're going to look at core beliefs and then core practices. So just as in Christianity and rather late on in the development of Judaism, Muslims have argued quite a bit about what are their core beliefs. And we'll look at these and then afterwards we'll go on to the practice things. So there are 3 principles that are universally accepted by all Muslims. Number 1 is the unity of God, which is in a monotheism, that's pretty necessary. Number 2 is God's revelation by means of prophets and scripture. And number 3 is God's final judgment of humans and the reward and punishment associated with that. Interestingly, those are exactly the same 3 principles chosen by the Jewish philosopher Joseph Albo, who lived in Spain. He died in 1444, good yet remember. And in his Sefer HaKarim, the Book of Principles, those are his 3 main principles, which is another sort of interesting parallel between Judaism and Islam. Albo produced his list of 3, partly in reaction to Maimonides' list of 13 principles, because he didn't agree with them. So various people reacted to Maimonides, but Albo is one of the best known. And interestingly enough, he chose exactly the same 3. So we're going to look at these in more detail, and I will just share some text with you. Wait a minute. Oh, that's the wrong one. I have given you the wrong file. Let me get the right file. That would help, wouldn't it? Where are we? Is it that one or that one? Is that the right one? No, that's the wrong one again. I'm sorry. I obviously got it in the wrong order. No. Oh, whichever one I press on, it keeps giving me the wrong one. Hang on. I'm sorry about this. Just have to do it from first principles, not do open recent. Because whichever I press, it gives me the incorrect one. Right. Now, do share screen, and that should. There we are. That's the correct one. Okay. So first one, God's unity. And in Arabic, this is tawhid. Interestingly, I've noticed this in London. Very often things like taxi services and restaurants called tawhid. So I'm not sure if Jews ever use core principles to name their businesses after, but apparently it's a thing. So you might see this word tawhid, and it's obviously related to echad, that sort of root. And we can illustrate this with a complete surah of the Quran that we already looked at, number 112, which is a very well known. It's one of those sort of peak moments in the Quran. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, say, He is God, the one and only God, the eternal, absolute. He begets not, nor is he begotten, and there is none like him. This is clearly quite anti-Christian. He begets not, nor is he begotten. No idea of God having a son. You can't have trinities in Islam. It's an absolute monotheism. And I think we, as Jews, would probably all agree with that. So nothing much to see here. Yep, we know this. And it's very much the same idea of the absolute oneness of God, no compromises, no bits and pieces, no subdivisions. Revelation, again, this is a text we've looked at before, so I'm just bringing it again because it really encapsulates this. Say, we believe in God and what was brought down to us. Most Muslims would understand that as the Quran. And what was brought down to Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac and Jacob and the tribes, and what was given to Moses. All that would be Torah and prophetic revelation to those people. And Jesus, that would cover the New Testament. And what was given to the prophets from their Lord, that's all prophets. We do not distinguish between any of them. We are submitters, Muslimun, which you can read as Muslims or submitters to him, to God. So Muslims have dealt with their predecessors by just accepting their scriptures on principle and not necessarily reading them or using them or studying, but accepting that God has a practice of sending prophets, and to some prophets he sends written revelations, and they're all true. But from the Muslim point of view, the Quran is the best and the most polished version. Why would you bother really reading the earlier ones so much? Because you've got the best one. So it's unusual for Muslims to study the Bible or the New Testament, but they're aware of them and they think they're holy. Some Muslims may think that the Jews have slightly rewritten the Torah in order to put their point of view forward, but by no means all Muslims say that. I have met a couple of Muslims who think that. But the idea that you have a written scripture means that you are a religion that Islam can respect. So there have been modern interfaith attempts to try and diffuse tension between Muslims and Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs. And a lot of that has concentrated on the fact that both Hindus and Sikhs do have written scriptures. They're somewhat different in nature from the Abrahamic faiths, but it's a starting point. If people can be described, this is what the very famous phrase people of the book means. It means people who have a book sent to them from God. And if you have that, then Islam on principle does recognize you, as long as you only believe in one God. The Quran itself mentions 25 prophets, including Abraham, Isaac and Jacob and so on. Ishmael is a prophet. Jesus is seen as a prophet, not as the Son of God. The Muslims think that the Christians got it all wrong. There are some unique prophets in the Quran, people like Hud and Salih, that we don't know about from anywhere else. But Islam is quite happy with the idea that different groups of people get their own prophet, and some get a book on top of that. So it's a very open and flexible way of dealing with the fact that there are predecessor monotheistic religions. The Christians will do it differently by sort of annexing the Tanakh and going, well, actually, we know the right way to read it and you don't. Though there has been improvement on that score in modern times. And we don't really have, well, we have a different problem because we're the earliest. Other people's later scriptures are irrelevant theologically to us. We don't have to accommodate them. We just go, I don't know, we've got the Torah. Like, you know, you came along with a new book and we don't know anything about it. So it's a different sort of attitude towards scriptures. And it can be quite surprising to think that Muslims are quite happy that the Torah, or the Taurah, which is the word used for it in the Quran, is holy. And the Injil, which comes from the word evangelion, meaning gospels, is also holy. And they're fine with that. Absolutely fine. God's final judgment. Again, we'll look at a passage of the Quran. It's quite a major theme in the Quran, and it figures much more in Muslim thinking than I think it does in the consciousness of most Jews. You know, if you ask most Jews, what do you think is going to happen on the last day? They'll go, I don't know, there's some sort of judgment, punishment, reward, don't know, we'll think about it when we get there. But Muslims spend a lot of time thinking about it. And in a way that's a little bit like some fundamentalist Christians, there's this sort of sense of you better not do that because in the next world or at the last day, you'll have a problem then. So it's used a bit more in an active fashion. But let's read this, which is by no means the only passage in the Quran about it, but a very typical one. They, and the they here are opponents of true religion. They do not assess the measure of God fully. When the entire earth is in his grip on the day of resurrection, the heavens rolled up in his right hand, God be praised and transcendent beyond any association they make. This word association, shirk, is the same as shituf in Judaism, the association of another power with God. And the trumpet will be blown, that might sound familiar, and all in the heavens and on earth will faint, except those whom God wills. Then it will be blown a second time. Now they will be standing, waiting. And the earth will shine in the light of its Lord, and the book will be laid out. It's not quite clear which book, the Quran or a book of judgment. You could take it both ways. And the prophets and the witnesses will be brought forth, and true judgment will be made among them. They will not be wrong. And every soul will be recompensed for what it did, for God knows best what they do. And those who refuse to believe will be driven in crowds to hell. Again, this would not apply to other monotheists. virtuous monotheists of other groups wouldn't be people who refused to believe. They did believe. When they arrive, its gates will be opened, and its keepers will say to them, didn't your own messengers come to you and recite to you the signs of your Lord, warning you of meeting this day? They will say, yes, indeed, but the word of punishment for those who refuse to believe is just. It will be said, enter the gates of heaven, of hell forever. How miserable the dwelling of those who think themselves great. But those who are pious to their Lord will be driven to the garden. This is Jannat al-Adan, the Garden of Eden, until when they reach it, its gates will be opened. Its keepers will say to them, peace upon you. You have been good, so enter it forever. They, the good, will say, praise be to God, who has fulfilled his promise and has bequeathed to us the earth to dwell in the garden wherever we desire. How wonderful the reward of workers. And you will see angels surrounding the throne, singing out praise of God, judged correctly. And it will be said, praise be to God, Lord of the worlds. This is not a million miles different from various biblical visions of the end of days and later developments, particularly in rabbinic times, of the idea that there's a heaven and a hell. The Tanakh itself is a bit vague about all this and doesn't spend any time discussing it. We have this concept in Torah of Sheol, of somewhere dark and dry and dusty under the earth where you go when you're dead, where whatever you do really, you know, when Yaakov is mourning Yosef, he says, I'll go down to Sheol mourning him. And in Isaiah, you have descriptions of the great kings sitting there powerless and desperate in Sheol where nothing happens. You don't really have descriptions of heaven. Later on in the rabbinic period, you get very good descriptions of heaven and quite lethal descriptions of hell. And in the Middle Ages, this is developed enormously in Jewish thinking. I would say probably in the modern Orthodox world, there's not a lot of dwelling on it. I can't think of any rabbi I've ever heard who, you know, did one of these hellfire sermons about, you know, you're all going to hell unless you do X. I gather it is used to some extent in the Haredi world. I've met people who said, I was told I would go to hell if I make tea with a cup of tea bag on Shabbat. But it's a very big thing for Muslims. And they often have, you know, workshops or courses thinking about the akhira, about the afterlife. And people do challenge each other, you know, don't do that because God will judge you. So it is a very, very, very emphasized theme in Muslim thought. And we have some more principles. Those are the three basic ones, but there are other ones. Sometimes they rely more on hadith, but particularly in the Sunni world, and I would say wider than the Sunni world, there are some other beliefs. So there's belief in angels and jinn. The Quran often refers to angels, malak, almost the same as malach. In the garden of the original Garden of Eden, the Quran says God created Adam and gave him a status that is in some ways above the angels. The angels were commanded to bow before Adam, and one angel called Iblis, which is again, from a non-faith point of view, it's probably corruption of diabolos, the Greek for devil. Faithful Muslims would not see it that way. They'd say, no, his name is Iblis, that's it. So this one angel, Iblis, refused to bow down before Adam, and he was cast out and became a force for evil, with a host of evil followers called shayateen, Satans. It's very like the Lucifer story that you can find in various rabbinic texts, and it certainly gets developed by the Christians, the idea of the fallen angel, the one who was in heaven gets thrown out for disobeying God. So this story is actually in the Quran, and we'll look at it. Again, it's not 100% clear, but the way it's taught or understood is fairly unitary. So God starts speaking. God often refers to himself as we in the Quran. It's the royal plural, the plural of majesty. It is we who created you, humans, and gave you shape. Then we bade the angels bow down to Adam, and they bowed down. Not so Iblis. He refused to be of those who bow down. God said, and the Quran just says he said, but you understand it's God. What prevented you from bowing down when I commanded you? He, Iblis, said, I am better than he. You created me from fire, and him, Adam, from clay. God said, get down from this. It is not for you to be arrogant here. Get out, for you are of the meanest of creatures. Iblis said, give me respite till the day they are raised up. God said, be among those who have respite. He said, Iblis says, because you had thrown me out of the way, lo, I will lie in wait for them on your straight way. Then will I assault them from before them and behind them, from their right and their left. Nor will you find in most of them gratitude for your mercy. So he's speaking directly to God. God said, get out from this, disgraced and expelled. If any of them follow you, hell will I fill with you all. So there is a strong concept of the devil. And again, this is a weak concept in Judaism. We have the Satan, but the Satan, he doesn't turn up much. He turns up in the book of Job, the book of Eov, where he's a bit of a cardboard figure who's there to sort of challenge God and test Job as to his patience. And he appears quite a bit in Midrash. The Satan often comes and tries to tempt Abraham, but he's a bit of a stock figure. He doesn't have much of a personality. And I have to say, most of the Jews I know don't actually worry about a Satan coming and tempting them. We don't have a big devil tradition. Again, devils get a bit bigger in the Middle Ages, but I would say, well, you can also be the judge because you know of the belief system that you have received. It's not a big deal in Judaism. It's a very big deal in Islam. People have a very, very rounded picture of Iblis or Shaitan, which obviously is the same root as Satan. And they do worry about getting tempted because they think Iblis is out to get them and will smuggle himself into their lives and tempt them out of the straight way, and then they'll get punished. So again, that's an emphasis that might be more familiar in Christianity or certain forms of Christianity, but not so much in Judaism. As for the good angels, there are two named angels in the Qur'an. There's Jibril, who is Gabriel, and there is Mikal, who is Michael. So again, from the non-faith point of view, by the time the Quran is written, both Gabriel and Michael have large rabbinic textual biographies. They barely, they're just mentioned in the book of Daniel. But most angels, certainly in the Torah, don't have names at all or personalities. It's just a malach. And it's not even clear if some of the malachim are actually human messengers who are placed by God in particular junctures of biblical figures' lives to tell them something. So we have a sort of biblically, I would say we have an underworked or underdeveloped concept of a malach. It's a little ambiguous. That changes in Judaism from the rabbinic period onward, where we get a whole load of non-mainstream texts, or at least they're not mainstream now, which talk about hierarchies of angels and the angel Metatron. And if you look at a lot of early rabbinic literature, you will find a huge emphasis on angels that, again, I think are sort of rather gone out of fashion in the modern period. There are still people who write Jewish amulets and the names of angels.
Okay.
Sorry? Or was that somebody just unmuting by mistake? Sorry. So angels are bigger in Islam than they are in Judaism, and possibly as a result of later Jewish developments. If we look at this in the academic or the non-faith view, given that from that point of view, there is quite a lot of derivation of concepts from a late version of rabbinic Judaism, then maybe we shouldn't be so surprised, especially as, again, in Christianity, angels have become quite important by then. In fact, the archangels, Michael and Gabriel and Raphael and what have you, are a major thing in early Christianity, or fairly early Christianity. So again, we can see overlaps, we can see parallels, we can see, from an academic point of view, we can see perhaps origins in Jewish and Christian ideas that then get woven into Islam. That is not the way Muslims themselves would understand it. It's the same in the Quran. That's why we know. Let's go back to we've talked about Iblis and the Shaitan, the Satans who follow him. We've talked a bit about angels, the Malakim. There are also the Jinn. The singular is the Jinni, and that is where the English word genie comes, as in the genie in the bottle. He was originally a jinni in a bottle. And the jinn don't have a parallel at all in Judaism or in Christianity. They are supernatural creatures. They can take possession of a person. Some of them are Muslim, some of them are good, some of them are bad. In the pre-Islamic period, they were thought to possess poets, and you became a poet when a jinn possessed you. It was a supernatural possession that enabled you to to compose poetry. It would have been oral poetry largely. And in fact, Muhammad is actually accused of being possessed by a jinn in the Quran itself by his enemies. They say, oh, you're a madman, you have a jinn. And the jinn are thought to have been created from smokeless fire, unlike Iblis, who's created from ordinary fire. And jinn are often dangerous troublemakers, but they're less powerful than the shayateen and the devils and the followers of Iblis. They had limited lifespans, they don't live forever, and they are judged by God just as humans are judged by God. So jinn turn up a lot in many, many Muslim stories. They do turn up in the Quran as well, but they are sort of a second degree. So you have an interesting contrast. You have absolute monotheism, but you do have an array of supernatural creatures, angels, Iblis, and the shaitan and the jinn, who are floating around and are also made by God and subject to God, but interact with humans in different ways. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative. So you've got this extra factor that I don't think we really have in modern Judaism so much. Maybe in some little corners of the Haredi world, I think there is a worry about demons and things like that. But I would say in mainstream Judaism, it's all been damped down somewhat in the modern period. Okay, so another really important matter of dispute about belief in Islam was the contrast between whether humans have free will or whether everything is decided by God. So predestination, God has decided everything down to the last leaf that falls off a tree, or not predestination, human beings have this power to make decisions. Most religions have had this concept and had this argument. Jews have certainly had this argument. Muslims refer to it classically as the issue of God's power and decree, al-qadar wal-qada. And the Quran repeatedly stresses the power of God to the extent that he has decided everything before creation and written it down, but also has verses that suggest that people have free will. So we'll have a little look at that. Here's the verse that suggests that God has decided everything. The keys of the unseen are with him, with God. No one knows them aside from him, who knows what is on the land and in the sea, and no leaf falls without God knowing it, nor a single grain in the darkness of the earth, nothing verdant and nothing withered that is not in the clear book. And then again, which book is this? Is this the Quran as it's thought to be? We talked about the idea that Quran exists eternally with God, the pre-created Quran, versus there was a school of thought that thought of the Quran as a work created in time by God, as opposed to coexisting with God. We said that actually the coexisting with God from eternity is the view that prevailed. And maybe because of that, the view that tended to prevail in the argument was the predestination view. But there are verses in the Quran that suggest people have free will. So one that for some reason, I can't think why I didn't put on the handout, is from the 18th chapter of the Quran, where it says, "Say, the truth is from your Lord. Whoever wishes will believe, and whoever wishes will deny. We have prepared a fire for the deniers. As for those who believe and do good works, we do not neglect the reward of anyone who does a good deed." So judgment makes no sense unless you have free will. You can't judge people when you've programmed them to do something good or bad. So you do have a tension in Islam between the idea that God knows everything that's going to happen but people have free will. And that's worked out in different ways at different times. And still today, I think different Muslims might have different views on where that balance lies, depending very much on your attitude to the world around you, the tradition you come from, and your level of education. So the ambiguity of the Quran here and elsewhere gave plenty of scope for argument about a lot of very central ideas. And that has gone on through Muslim history. So not everyone agrees, especially where the Quran is a little vague or presents two possible positions. And some of those arguments do still go on. It's not all cut and dried, as with, again, all religions, really. Okay, so having looked at the basic beliefs in Islam, we're going to move on to Islam in practice. And classically, it's thought of as the 5 pillars of practice. And we'll look at each one individually. We'll just look at them first of all as a set. The first is shahada, witnessing, which is basically the declaration of God's unity and Muhammad's status as a prophet. So everyone who prays regularly does that. Salat, prayer, formal prayer 5 times daily, and that is incumbent on men and women, which is interesting when you think that Judaism says it's incumbent on men, and let's have an argument about how far women's duties of prayer are concerned. And it's there are different
Dr. Lindsey, could I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
When it comes to the difference between prayer and the witnessing, the salat and the shahada, what is the status of the shahada? I have seen and heard people perform it. Is it not prayer?
It comes in prayer. We'll do a little bit more on it in a moment. It is part of prayer, but it's also a standalone. So, for instance, the entire process of Islamic conversion is reciting the shahada in front of 2 witnesses. You're done. You don't need a bet din. You don't need a course. You can just walk in off the street to a mosque, say, I want to become a Muslim. And they say, okay, read this in front of 2 people, and that's it. So the shahada, in a sense, has a sort of status as an action that's a little bit separate from prayer, even though it is also part of prayer, if that makes it clear.
And would there be, you'll excuse my categories, but I'm thinking in terms of Jewish law, would there be a requirement, like the Shema is said morning and evening? Is there a requirement that it is said daily?
I don't think it's a separate requirement. It is just part of formal prayer. So, and you have to pray. So you couldn't get away with just saying the shahada. You would have to do it in the context of the required prayer modules, which we'll talk about in a moment. So it's related to prayer, but it does have this separate status, and it wouldn't replace prayer. Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah. The third pillar is zakat, charity, which at the basic level, the obligatory charity is 2.5% of your liquid assets have to be given to the poor and needy. And there are all sorts of calculators on the net where you feed in your various assets and income and this, and out pops the answer of how much you have to give to charity that year. Of course, giving more than that is very praiseworthy. Again, in Judaism, some people will regularly give 10% or more every year of their income. Again, we don't perhaps have so much consciousness of exact amounts. You can find discussion of exact amounts in classical literature. I'd say that people's consciousness today is it's good to give the zakah, but many people are not conscious that perhaps they should be giving a certain proportion of their income. That might be a little bit more fluid. Muslims know very well that they've got to give zakat. The non-zakat charities are called sadaqah, which of course is a word familiar to us. That's the over and above, I want to give more. Then there's Saum, which of course is cognate with Tzom, fasting, the dawn to dusk fast during the month of Ramadan. We'll talk about that in a moment in more detail. And Hajj, which actually is related to the Hebrew chug, because chug itself is a circle, and Hajj, of course, to go in circles. And this is the pilgrimage to Mecca. And that should be done at least once in your life, and that's incumbent on men and women. Anyone who can afford it and is in a condition of health that they can go, they really should go once in their life. If they don't manage to go because of poverty, okay, they haven't committed a sin, but it's something that's desperately, most Muslims desperately want to do Hajj at least once. Lucky people go more than once. Okay, so let's break that down. The Shahada, as we said, is a statement of testimony, really, to the unity of God. And it actually runs, I bear witness that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. And it does have a sort of iconic value, a bit like the Shema in Jewish civilization. And as we said, as long as all you have to do to convert is say that in Arabic in front of 2 Muslim witnesses, boom, you're a Muslim. No more is demanded of you. That is it. Very different from us. You can understand how it might become a world religion with 1 billion people, because if it's that easy to get in, unlike Judaism, where you have to work on it for years to convince a bet din to be allowed in, it's probably the easiest religion to convert to in the world. Christians generally would like you to do a bit of learning before you get baptized, but Muslims, that's fine. Enter in and we'll teach you afterwards. Okay, Salat. Salat itself, the word is cognate to tzlota in Aramaic, and if you've ever said Kaddish and that's tzlotana, it's the same word. The formal required prayers are what are called salat, and as we said, both women and men are required to perform them. Private prayer, extra prayer, is called dua, and you can do as much dua as you like or don't like, that's up to you entirely. So people will often say, if somebody's ill, will say, oh, I'll make dua for her, by which they mean that after they've finished their prayers at any point. They'll stop and do some individual private prayer afterwards, or they might just do it anyway without any connection with the formal prayers. There is no siddur in Islam. Practically, literacy hasn't been so demanded in Islam as in Judaism, perhaps. Often Islam has taken root in cultures that were largely illiterate or were completely illiterate, and there's a lot of moving in prayer. So it would be quite inconvenient to have a book in your hands, I have to say. And the prayers are quite short, and they're memorized from a very young age, and they are modular. You repeat modules. As in Judaism, you don't need a clergyman to lead a service. A prayer leader, an imam, a sort of imam for the purposes of prayer, not a community imam, just has to be any respected and pious member of the community who knows how to lead. There are places where women lead women. In China, notably, there are women's mosques where women lead other women in prayer. There is a bit of a controversy about whether women can lead men in prayer, and there are some Muslims who say, yes, of course they can, but it is controversial. Amazing how similar some of this sounds. There is no singing or music in formal prayer at all. Muslims can pray anywhere they like, as long as it's clean and quiet. If a mosque is available, that's the best place to do it. Prayer rugs are just to make sure that when you're prostrating, you're on a clean surface. They don't have any religious value in themselves. It's just a way of ensuring that you've got this little designated area that you know is clean and it's good. And the prostration, sujood, which is part of the required movements, is done in a completely clean place. Formal prayers, the salat is in Arabic. You can do dua in any language. As in Judaism, communal prayer is considered to be better than individual prayer. Not necessarily a chiyuv in the way that we would think of it, but it's a good thing to go to the mosque on a Friday. Communal prayer is a good thing. And if there's a mosque available, then you should do it. Some prayers are out loud. Some are quiet and individually recited. It should be neither too loud nor too soft. And kavanah, what we would call kavanah, is very, very essential. And you should start prayer with what's called niyah, which means intention. In other words, I am intending to do, in certain communities, you might say, I'm intending to do shachrit with full devotion. That would be a standard start to prayer for Muslim. I've got the niyah that I am doing the or whichever prayer it is. What about mosques? A mosque in Arabic is a masjid, a place of prostration. They don't have to be buildings, as long as it's clean and it's used regularly for prayer. It's a mosque. If you've ever been to the Jerusalem Citadel, you may have noticed as you cross over the moat, there is down in the moat, there's a little open air mosque. It's been there for yonks. It's just a designated area, and that would be quite standard. Architecturally, mosques are enormously varied, as are shuls. There are very few requirements. You can't have any images in a mosque, hence lots and lots often of calligraphic ornamentation. Verses of the Qur'an are there as decoration because you certainly can't have pictures. That sounds pretty familiar. There does need to be a washing area outside the mosque. It's often in a courtyard. And Muslims need to be in a state of tahara. It's the same word, purity, same word in Hebrew and Arabic, before praying, before handling the Qur'an or taking part in the Hajj. So your standard prayer ablutions, what's called wudu, are the face, arms up to the elbow, and feet. And that is what you need to do before actually doing your formal prayers. There is also a full ablution, not by immersion. They don't have mikvahs, but the full one is called ghusl. And that's done after what are regarded as polluting activities like having sex, giving birth, having a period, things like that. And after that, but again, it's just having a shower, really. It's not, you don't have to go to a special place. It's just a full body cleanse. Shoes are not worn in mosques because they are a source of impurity. And you'll find that often in some Sephardi shuls in the Islamic world. Jews also take their shoes off before they go and pray. Of course, we know this also from the temple and from Moshe being told to take his shoes off at the burning bush. So again, it's not a concept we're unfamiliar with at all. Inside the mosque, the only two special features are the mihrab, which is a little niche which shows you which way Mecca is, and so the direction towards Mecca is a bit like a mizrach, really. It doesn't have to look like anything. It just has to be something on the wall that says, okay, Mecca is that way. And the only other bit of furniture that you should have is a minbar, which is a pulpit from which the local imam will give a sermon on Friday at communal prayer. And that's about it. Don't need anything else at all. The Quran specifies you should pray towards Mecca. The original direction was towards Jerusalem, and then Muhammad is told to change it. And this is the verse: "From wherever you go forth, turn your face in the direction of the sacred mosque, and wherever you are, turn your face in its direction." So pretty clear. And what happens at prayers? People line up in rows. It's quite important to be in a straight row. Women may be in a separate space. Many mosques don't have anywhere for women at all. About 50% of the mosques in the UK don't, and women are very cross about this. Women can, it's usually accepted that women can lead other women in prayer. As I said, there have been some examples of mixed prayer with a woman leading men, notably Amina Wadud in New York, but also my friend from Hamburg, Halima Krausen, who's a European Islamic scholar, she has done that too. But it's a bit more controversial. Okay, so 5 daily prayers: Fajr, dawn; Dhuhr, just afternoon, related to Tsaharine, by the way; Asr, which is afternoon, midway between noon and sunset, so a mincha time; Maghrib, like Ma'arif, same word, just after sunset; and Isha, between the end of sunset and midnight. But you may be thinking, oh my heavens, 3 times a day, 5 times a day, 3 times is bad enough. They are shorter than Jewish prayers, especially shorter than Shacharit. So it's much more like a mincha length, really. So you're not spending your entire time praying. Shiites have the same prayers. They will combine Zuhr and Asr sometimes, a bit like people do Mincha Ma'ariv. So they have the ability to do that. And they'll also combine Maghrib and Isha, so they boil it down to 3, basically. Sunnis don't do that so much. And the prayer starts with a call to prayer, which we do have. Anyone know what our call to prayer is in Judaism? It's moved. It's now almost halfway through the service. It's no longer the start. Baruch Hu is our call to prayer, exactly. So the Adhan is like that. The Adhan is the call to prayer. And I've got a little video I'll show you of it. And this is the text: God is most great, Allahu Akbar, and you say that 4 times. I testify there is no God but God, which is half of the Shahada. I testify that Muhammad is the messenger of God, that's the other half of the Shahada. Come alive, or come to the prayer. Come alive, or come to flourishing. The word is Chai, so you can hear the echo of Chai there. Then you go back to God is most great, Allahu Akbar twice. There is no God but God. So I'm going to stop the share, call up it's about, I can go back into Zoom and share it, I hope. Share. Yeah, let's just do that. So this is a nice version with translation.
The sound is not coming across very well, Dr. Lindsey.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, we got to the end of it. I'm so sorry. But it's yeah, it's that was a very flourishing, a sort of elaborate version of it. You can get much more simple ones, and I've been present at Muslim prayers where just a group of 8 people are doing the prayer, and one person is appointed to do the call, and they just all go Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and they just sort of do it with minimum tunes. So as long as you do it, it's done. So essentially, once that's done, then prayer starts. And one person stands in front of the community as the imam. And you really don't have to have any qualifications. Even if there are only 2 people, one person is standing in front. There's no concept of a minyan. There are some disagreements about how many people you should have, preferably, but everyone I've ever met just, we've got 2 people, we're both doing it. And each person starts by silently declaring their intention. This niyyah, the intention. And then you have a formal sequence of words and actions. They are cycles. Each one's called a raka'ah and several of them rakat. And you have a required number for each of the 5 daily prayers, but some people add extras. I have been, again, at interfaith places where somebody seems to be praying much longer than everyone else. And I said to the Muslims, what's going on? Oh, she's doing extra rakat. It's one of those sort of extra things you might want to do. Each rakah stands with the person, starts with the person reciting the first surah of the Qur'an and another bit from anywhere in the Qur'an, doesn't matter. And then you've got this sequence of movements that go with the prayers. First, a deep bow, you sort of go absolutely halfway, a bit like Modimana in the Aleinu. And then there's full prostration when you get right down with your head on the ground and your hands on either side. Then there's a sitting part, prostration again, and that's sort of the end of the module. And then you start again with the next rak'ah. When the full number of rak'ah have been done, the person stays sitting down and they recite a prayer that's a bit like the Shahada, and a prayer that God should bless Muhammad and his family. And that's where you add personal prayers in. And they end with a blessing of peace called the Taslim, which is obviously from Salam, Shalom. Peace and divine blessings and mercy to you all. And it's very like, or say Shalom at the end of the Amida, because they look right and they say it, and they look left and they say it. And again, it's sort of familiar. You go, oh yes, we do that, something like that. And that's explained either as a blessing to all Muslims or to all humans, or to the 2 angels on either shoulder, which sounds again a bit like a Jewish tradition about on Erev Shabbat, a good angel and a bad angel come home with you from Shabbat, from Shul. Again, I'm hoping this one will work a bit better. There is a nice, again, 3-minute, no, wait a minute, I'm going to have to call it up first. Little educational video of somebody doing Salat. And again, with these things, I think it's worth actually seeing what it's like, because it's all very well me describing, but it's much easier actually to see what goes on. So I'll keep an eye on the notes. So let me know, the chat, let me know if it doesn't work so well. Get it shared, there we are.
Muslims have 5 duties in life. They are called the 5 pillars of Islam. The second pillar is Salah, the duty to pray 5 times a day. Muslims say these prayers in Arabic and go through a series of movements called rak'ah. The number of rak'ahs will depend on which prayer is being performed. Before Muslims pray, they must remove their shoes and perform a special wash called wudu. Then they must make sure that their body is fully covered. Women should wear a headscarf. Finally, they need to find a clean space in which to pray. A prayer mat will do, and must face in the right direction, the direction of the Kaaba in Mecca. This is called the Qibla. Now let's see how the prayers are performed. This series of movements is known as one raka'ah and is repeated a number of times depending on the prayer. Then the rest of the prayer is continued. After the prayer is complete, it is common for Muslims to make dua to God, asking for forgiveness and blessings. The prayer is said in Arabic, but the dua can be said in any language. And that's how Muslims perform their Salah.
So again, interestingly, what they chose as the soundtrack is actually the adhan, the call to prayer. And this is because she's saying her prayers silently. And the only bit you can really hear is when she switches from one rak'ah to another, she says Allahu Akbar. And also when you change your position, say Allahu Akbar. So it punctuates it. And this is how the Imam keeps everyone in the same bit of the rak'ah. You hear Allahu Akbar, and then you know, okay, now I should bow. And then you're reciting whatever you recite, and then the Imam says Allahu Akbar, and you're okay, this is when I get down on the floor. So it acts as a pacer, a little bit like Kaddish does with us, but we have books, so it's not so difficult to keep everyone together. And the thing I have noticed when present at Muslim prayer is they seem to get into this instant state of kavanah. I mean, Jews just don't, very often we are sort of talking or we're walking around because we have much longer prayers and it's easier for us to get distracted. And I think because it's from memory and there is a culture of you don't move around, you stay focused, you are doing what you are doing, there is no talking. It's a different prayer culture, if you like, and it certainly gives all the Jews sort of sit there thinking, oh my heavens, we don't show up very well here because these people are just slap bang into absolute devotion the moment they start. I'm not sure if that's what it feels like from inside, but certainly as an observer, that's what it looks like to me, is that all these people have the most incredible capacity for covered up. So I think we could learn something. They, on the other hand, might want to learn something for us about the music, the role of singing and music in community prayer. But I don't think that's going to happen. Just very different style. Friday noon prayer is just community prayer. It's not, Friday's not a day of rest, so there is no corresponding concept of Shabbat at all in Islam. What you're meant to do on Friday is just go to the noonday prayer and be with the community. But if you don't, it's not the end of the world. Again, there is a minimum for Friday community prayer. Some schools of thought say it's 4, some people say it's 40. Women don't count and don't have to attend. And there are countries where women don't go to the communal prayer at all. And that is the only day you get a sermon. It starts with a sermon. Women don't do salat prayers when they're menstruating. Nor do they go into mosques or recite or touch Qur'ans or fast in Ramadan, though they have to make up the fast. So again, there are some similarities, but I would say it's a more definite exclusion. Again, there are some modern Muslims who would say that's actually totally unnecessary and it's more of a minhag and it's not absolute. We talked more or less about zakat. We said that once a year you pay 2.5% of your liquid assets. Once your wealth reaches a certain amount, 85 grams worth of gold, and I've got a note here that was about 2,000 American dollars in May 2007. So really, really poor people don't have to pay zakat, but everybody else does. The fasting in Ramadan, again, you probably know quite a bit about this because as Muslims move into Western countries, it's more familiar because obviously it can impact on work and things like that. So it's a bit like our fasts for, say, Rabba Tammuz, 17th of Tammuz. It's a dawn to dusk one. They don't ever have anything like Yom Kippur. They never do a 25-hour one. Also during Ramadan, no smoking, no sex, no chewing gum, no taking medicine except for by injection. If you eat by mistake or you can't, or you can't fast if you're pregnant or in it, or if you've just given birth, or you're traveling, you have to make up the days you've missed after Ramadan. So some people will add 60 extra days. Some people who simply can't for medical reasons will pay for 60 meals for the poor as a sort of compensation for not fasting. And Ramadan's a very intense season, but it's also quite joyous. People break the fast communally with families. There are special Ramadan foods, especially dates. People break fast on dates. There are special TV series in Muslim countries, and people get together and watch the telly for these, Ramadan serials, I think. It is a bit like the Yamin Noraim. It's sort of quite, really from Muslims, do a lot of extra praying and a lot of Qur'an study. Many people recite the entire Qur'an during this month. It's actually, there are traditional divisions up into 30, so you can do a bit every night. And the last days are particularly sacred, especially the night of Laylatul Qadr, the night of power, which is traditionally thought to be the anniversary of the revelation of the Quran, even though that slightly contradicts with the idea that Muhammad got the Quran on separate occasions. But, okay, inconsistency in religion is a great thing. And the last thing we'll just discuss is the Hajj. And this is a big deal, and it is a bit like the Regalim, this commandment that you should go up to Jerusalem for the 3 Regalim, and you should sacrifice and present yourself to God in the temple. So it's got that sort of force to it. And as we said, all Muslims, male and female, are required to go on Hajj to Mecca once at least in their lifetime, if they are physically able and if they can afford it. And it is this great spiritual height of somebody's life. Most of the ritual, interestingly, predates Islam. There was a Hajj to Mecca well before Muhammad. Muslims would say, yes, but it became idolatrous, and he came and cleaned it up. And a lot of what was done, what is done, it's derived from hadith rather than from Quran. So it's called a midrashic basis, if you like. Though the Quran does say that one should complete the Hajj. For Muslims, the Kaaba, this cube-like building in the middle of Mecca, is the original monotheistic sanctuary built by Abraham and Ishmael and purified from idols by Muhammad. These days, Saudi Arabia administers the Hajj and controls who goes. They allow about 2 million pilgrims a year. There are quotas for individual countries, so you might have to wait an awful long time till your name comes up on the list, and you have to go through your local mosque and get, letters saying yes, your coach should go on the Hajj. You have to be in a state of ritual purity. Men all have to wear 2 simple white cloths run around the waist, one over the shoulder. Women can wear what they like. As long as it's hijab, they have to cover their hair, but they cannot cover their faces, which is fascinating because you might thought that would be an extra requirement, very holy activity. No, even people who customarily cover their faces can't do that on Hajj. Their faces have to be visible. And there are lots of long and complicated rituals. So I'll just give you a basic idea, and then if we've got time, I've got a 3-minute video on the Hajj. Again, you need to see it rather than hear about it. It starts off with walking around the Kaaba 7 times, counterclockwise, reciting special prayers. Then you drink water from a sacred well, the Zamzam well. It's thought to be the well that the angel Gabriel created for Hagar. Same story as us, Hagar is out in the desert and needs to drink. The pilgrims head for the place of running, where they move between 2 low hills in imitation of Hajar, running backwards and forwards looking for water. These days, I think it's electronic, walkways, but in the old days they actually did run. The next day, and then for the men, their hair is ritually shaved. Just a small bit is cut off for women. They don't shave their heads. The next day, they travel about 5 miles away, where they spend the night in a tent city. The third day, there's the standing ritual at Arafat. From noon to sunset, they stand on this hill, and it's seen as a rehearsal for Judgment Day. A time of introspection and prayer. It's the essence of the Hajj. There's usually a sermon that's broadcast at the same time, and the pilgrims chant, Labbaika Allah, Labbaika, I am here, oh God, I am here. And they sort of chant this and chant this and chant this. There are lots of YouTube videos of people standing there doing this. After sunset, they move to a tent city at Muzdalifah, and they collect pebbles for the next day's ritual. And here there's another standing ritual in the morning, and then pebbles are thrown at one of 3 stone pillars that represent the devil. And again, this is connected with a hadith about Abraham, who throws stones at Satan when he tries to stop what we would call the Akedah. And it also represents every individual's struggle with Satan or with evil. And the stoning part of the pillars is the end of the official Hajj, but there are various things people do. They often sacrifice a goat sheep or cow. They distribute meat to the poor. And then Eid al-Adha, the Feast of the Sacrifice, ends the Hajj period off. It's at a particular time during the year. Male pilgrims shave their heads again, women cut another lock of hair off. And then there's another circling of the Kaaba. And after that, people sort of go off to see sacred sites associated with Muhammad. So that's the basic outline. But I'll just show you this, this video of it, because again, it's a very embodied thing. You really have to be there. I think this is the BBC actually came up with 7 things you don't know about the Muslim pilgrimage, but it's quite a good overview. So so I'm going very difficult negotiating between the full screen and not full screen. Right, so let's make that full screen and set it off.
You might be familiar with this picture. Thousands upon thousands of people, all wearing the same clothes and gathering somewhere in Saudi Arabia. This is the Hajj, the Muslim pilgrimage, and here are 7 things about it that you probably didn't know. You might have seen this, the big black cube. The Kaaba is a huge stone structure that sits at the heart of the Grand Mosque, Islam's most sacred place of worship. Pilgrims circle the Kaaba counterclockwise 7 times at both the beginning and the end of Hajj. It's a ritual called Tawaf. Pilgrims also typically travel back and forth between 2 hills called Safa and Marwa for also 7 times. It's not entirely clear why it's 7 specifically, but 7 is a prominent number associated with the divine in many religions, including Christianity and Judaism. It might surprise you to know that the Hajj generally has very little to do with the Prophet Muhammad. It actually commemorates the life of another prophet, Ibrahim. Yes, Abraham, who's also a key figure in both Judaism and Christianity. He was the one who rebuilt the Kaaba with his son Ismail. And Hajj rituals mostly follow the struggle of Ibrahim, his wife, and son in surrendering their wills to God. We've had a lot of debates in the West about Muslims' face veil or niqab. Well, one place where it's definitely not allowed is on the Hajj. Women are expected to cover their hair with headscarves similar to mine, but the face veil and burqa are not permitted in Hajj. You know what else? The pilgrimage industry is Saudi Arabia's second most important after oil and gas. The tourism sector contributes $22.6 billion to Saudi Arabia's economy, with Hajj providing nearly half of it. And the Hajj is really expensive. The average price of a Hajj package ranges between $4,000 up to $10,000 here in the UK. Selfies, not welcomed in Hajj. The Saudi authorities forbid taking photographs, whether with camera or a mobile phone, at some of the holy sites. Any violation of official instruction could lead to confiscation of your device. The idea is to make pilgrims focus entirely on their spiritual journeys. But this is not easy to enforce when you have millions of people all keen to have a memory from the once-in-a-lifetime journey. Hajj takes 5 days, and towards the end of it comes Eid al-Adha, or the festival of sacrifice. Muslims worldwide celebrate by slaughtering an animal, usually a sheep. This is another part of the ritual that relates to Prophet Ibrahim. It commemorates the willingness of Ibrahim to sacrifice his son Ismail as an act of obedience to God before God intervened to provide him with a ram to sacrifice instead. Finally, forming a Hajj is considered a great accomplishment for Muslims. In some cultures, people even add the title in front of their names to signify their accomplishments, so they are Hajji. The Hajj absolves Muslims of past sins, so before the Hajji-to-be travels to Mecca, it's very common for people to ask their relatives, friends, and acquaintances to forgive them.
So there, you could actually see some of the images, and there are masses and masses of, and obviously the Saudis haven't got the power to confiscate all these cameras. A lot of people are filming their own experience of Hajj, and there's some of the, clearly it's very, very moving for many, many people. But yes, and you notice it's based on the Akedah. And as I think we said earlier, that the Quran doesn't name which son it was that Abraham was thinking of sacrificing, but later hadith, or in other words, midrash, basically, some do actually mention Isaac, but from the late medieval period onwards, the strain of hadith saying it was Ishmael becomes much, much more common. And a lot of Muslims today don't know at all that actually there are quite a lot of early Muslim commentaries that say it was Isaac, which is quite interesting. And my friend Halima, the Muslim scholar, says the fact that Quran doesn't mention it shows that it doesn't matter which son it was. The whole point is Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son, which is an interesting way of putting it. So we've come to the end of our survey of beliefs and practices, and I'm going to give you that promised choice. So next week, we could finish off with, I'll give you three choices: a survey of the Muslim world today and the different political groups and types of Muslims around the world. Or we could do Sufism, which is the mystical tradition in Islam. Or if you like, we could focus on all those questions of modesty and hijab and compare that to the Jewish tradition of modesty. So I don't know if you want to write in the chat, which would you like to do? We haven't got that many people in the room, so if you're writing really quickly, I can get an idea of what most people would like of those three. Unless, of course, you want to do part 2 of the course, and then we could do them all. But we'll see what Rabbi Mark thinks about that. Oh, we've got 1 for modesty, 1 for the situation, 2 for modesty.
I would not like mysticism, Sufism. I would not like that.
Okay, so nobody's voted at all for Sufism. So I think it's between number 1 and number 3. So far we've got 2 for each. Anyone want to be the decider? We got any? We'll take Sufism off the menu.
Okay. What was 1 again? 1 is the
number
survey
1 would be a survey of the different movements and groups around the world, like the Salafis and the extremists and the not extremists and the reformists and what have you. And
I would vote for number 1.
Okay, so we've got 3 votes for number 1, 2 votes for number 3. Any advance on that? Rabbi Mark, have you got any opinions? Yeah.
I'm here for whatever the students would like to learn. If that's how they have voted, I'm very happy to go with 1 and 3 as the majority have decided.
Okay. Different doesn't so important, whatever majority chooses. Okay, looks as though the different elements around the world is just beginning to win out there. Yeah, last chance. Okay. So we'll go with that, and we'll have a look at that and get some sort of idea of a rough, how many of what type of Muslims are there. Fantastic. So I will see you next week. I will be joining you. Actually, no, it's before I go to Edinburgh. No, I will be joining you from London. Yeah. So have a great week. Thank
you so much, Rabba, Dr. Lindsey. Fascinating class. This to me was so much of what I had the expectations of when it was an introduction to Islam. The other classes have all been that, but this in particular really was like the meat of so much of what I was hoping you would touch on. I know I learned a lot and I was very appreciative. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and see you next week.
Okay. Be well, everybody. Have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.